Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Girls in Action podcast. We're your hosts. This is Brianna.
This is Melissa.
And this is Nick.
I know it's been a while since our last episode, but we're super excited to be back together today.
Today we'll be talking about the upcoming elections and equipping you all with the knowledge and research to help make the process smoother. This episode is for everyone, even if you are too young to vote. There are so many ways that you can be involved, and today we will list some of those ways for you to do so.
Yeah, so this election can be super nerve-wracking to a lot of us, but just know that there are so many ways to get involved, and you can get involved such as being a poll worker, or you can even still register to vote in person by choosing to vote with a provisional ballot. And to confirm or update your registration status on how to vote, make sure to check out the link in our bio.
So to start off today's episode, I'll be talking about how to research a candidate and some important stats for this upcoming election. So the essential goal of researching a presidential candidate is to develop an understanding of the candidate's experience, voting records, position, and views on current issues, political party, and more. Now, this is a lot to take in. So where the candidate stands on the issues happening in the world and in the US is a very important step. You can look at voter guides, and I'll explain this in the upcoming segment. You can look to see which candidate matches your political views on the issues that are really important to you. Another important detail is that the candidate is an ethical leader. So can this president win the election honestly with no help from outside countries? And are they under the influence of business interests? This is a little step that's often overlooked, but it's really important. Is this candidate racist, sexist, or homophobic? This is super important because if we have a presidential that has biases, who knows what they will do during their presidency? If you are an immigrant or someone who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, how will this president's views affect you? So keep some of these upcoming stats in mind while voting this year. So the Affordable Care Act is a huge issue that's been brought up, and here are some of Biden's and Trump's views. So Biden says yes to supporting Obamacare and public option. Trump says no to both. In terms of COVID-19, here are some questions that were asked. What is the plan, and do you support Trump withdrawal from the World Health Organization? Biden says his plan is more testing, strong federal response, wearing masks, and strengthen social distancing. He is opposed to the Trump withdrawal from the World Health Organization because it makes Americans safer. Trump's plan is states remain responsible for testing, there's no mandatory masks, and invest in developing vaccines. He approves the withdrawal from the World Health Organization because they failed to make the request and greatly needed reforms. So gun laws is another huge issue, and here are Biden and Trump's views on the following question. Are there going to be more restrictive legislation on guns? Are there going to be stricter background checks and bans on assault rifles? Biden says yes. Gun violence is a public health epidemic. He's going to ban assault rifles and have background checks for all gun sales. Trump says mostly no. Said would support background checks and then oppose the House bill mandating them.
And I just want to jump in right here and kind of talk about the issue of voters who vote because of a single issue. I think it's common with the gun law issue. I also think it's common with the abortion discussion. I just want to say that while you're researching a candidate, even if you are more passionate about one issue than another, really make sure you're looking at the entire picture and everything that the candidate supports, because voting because of one specific issue can be dangerous, especially if you don't even understand what the candidate stands for. So just be careful of that, because that can definitely impact the way you vote. So yeah, just be conscious that there is more than one issue. Even if it doesn't affect you, it will affect many other people. So just think about your candidates with a holistic review.
So the next issue is immigration, and this is some of Biden's and Trump's views. So the question is, will there be a path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented residents, including participants brought to the US as children, and position on border walls and limiting asylum? So Biden says yes. He's going to reinstate the DACA program, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. He believes that building a wall will do little to deter criminals seeking to exploit our borders, and he wants to modernize immigration and allow more total visas. Trump said he tried to end the DACA program but was overruled by the Supreme Court. He said he would veto DACA. He also declared a national emergency to pay for the border wall, and he's going to tighten legal immigration and asylum limits. So this last issue that I'm going to be talking about is climate change. And it's really important because this issue isn't going to end anytime soon. And it's really up to our generation to decide how to help. So this is the following question. Is human-caused climate change a serious threat? And are you going to limit greenhouse gases and fund renewable energy? So Biden says yes. He's going to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement to limit emissions. He's also going to introduce a $2 trillion plan to boost clean energy. Trump says that he does not know that it's a man-made issue, and he'll cut climate change funds, and he already withdrew from the Paris Agreement. So Brianna and Melissa, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I do want to say about everything that Naya just talked about. In this episode, for the majority of the time, we're going to be keeping it as unbiased as possible, and all of the things that she mentioned and the different candidates' positions weren't influenced by her opinions. They were just simply quotes or things that the candidates themselves said. But this following section we're going to kind of talk about our views on climate change and ways that you can get involved with it. Melissa can take it away from here.
Thanks, Brianna. So climate change is real. It's definitely not fiction. It's purely facts. And something important is to pay attention to the scientists instead of a politician who's inexperienced and also denies climate change and thinks that it's man-made. And I found something really cool. NASA has an entire webpage dedicated to evidence of climate change. Like, for example, they quoted that the planet's average surface temperature has risen about 2.05 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 19th century. And so this has been really driven by increased CO2 and other artificial human-made emissions into the atmosphere. And most of this warming has occurred in the past 40 years. And especially now in California, there's so many fires, and it means it's a telltale sign that the earth and its temperature is rapidly rising. And I feel like the entire ecosystem can slowly start becoming into something that we can't control anymore. And it's just really haunting. There is this art piece in New York, and it's called this climate clock, and it displays how many years, days, and seconds we have to achieve zero emissions. And we actually have 7 years to reach something reasonable. And so that's the only deadline that we have to end climate change. But yeah, I just wanted to offer some advice on how to do our part in the world. I feel like we can all take a small step, and it can be baby steps, but it can really help make a difference. For example, try to adopt sustainable lifestyle habits, which means that you could find ethical clothing retailers or even bring your own coffee cup when ordering coffee at Starbucks or Pete's. And also, you could try going waste-free or zero trash for a week and see how much trash you accumulate during that week. It's really mind-boggling on how much trash each person collects and has a day. But I think those changes can really make a big difference in our ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think I love the going waste free for a week. It's a fun little experiment. I've seen it done by a few different people. But our individual actions may seem insignificant when we have so many people in the world and so many big corporations and stuff that are contributing in these huge ways to the changing climate. But your individual actions do matter, and if we can all band together and do these little things collectively, it really can make a huge difference. But I want to talk a little bit about how the media approaches climate change. And there's this phrase that goes, there's more climate silence than there is climate science. So this is really interesting. I think a lot of news sources avoid talking about the topic because they don't want to be controversial. But it is an emergency. Climate change is an emergency. People are starting to refer to it as the climate crisis because we need to instill in people that this is a scary thing that is not going to stop anytime soon. And I know it can be scary, but that's what it is. And that's what scientists are calling it. And so how does this relate to the election? So much of this responsibility does fall upon who's elected as the president. And so there are lots of issues, many of which Naya already mentioned, that need our immediate attention, but climate change in particular really can't wait. So while there are those individual steps that can be taken, finding ways to reduce your own harmful impacts, we also need to look towards a future where we have dramatic changes in the way that we run things. And so I recently watched this documentary, and I would highly recommend it if you want to learn more about how the world has changed in the past 70, 80 years. It's David Attenborough in A Life. The documentary is called A Life on Our Planet, and it's available on Netflix. And this is a quote from the movie, and it's talking about sustainable fishing and farming methods and reducing the land that we use to farm, which would allow us to return like different species to their lands and help just like kind of, revive the lands to how they used to be. So this quote goes, "If we all had a largely plant-based diet, we would need only half the land we use at the moment. And because we would then be dedicated to raising plants, we could increase the yield of this land substantially." So, I know vegetarianism is definitely not an option for everybody. It's expensive to eat fresh foods, and in some places there are food deserts and it's hard to access these foods. But if this is an option for you, definitely take that opportunity. And then another issue that's big is deforestation. So one of the calls to action in that documentary that I mentioned is we immediately halt deforestation. And the argument against that is, but we still need to grow oil palms, and there's so many products that rely, and businesses and stuff that rely on its production. But we just need to look at all of the land that we've already deforested and use that land to grow the oil palm and whatever else. So I guess my final advice, just inform yourself about it. Listen to the scientists, care, because it's your future, it's everyone's future. And yeah, it's important. So I don't know, any other thoughts on that, you all?
Yeah, that is so important. I will definitely watch that documentary. But yeah, I feel like anything that you do, big or small, can make a really lasting impact, no matter if it's going vegan or if it's adopting sustainable clothing or something like that. But yeah, I think that it's just something that we need to address quickly.
Thank you, Melissa and Brianna, for those amazing insights. One thing that everyone can do and just take some time from your day and explore our nature is you can do some community service projects, and these include going to a national park and picking up trash in those parks, or you can go to the beach and pick up the trash you see, because most of our trash ends up in the ocean. So trying to limit and trying to decrease the number of plastic that ends up in the ocean is a really important step, and community service is one way we can help reduce our carbon footprint.
Totally. And so yeah, we have these little small solutions that we can do as individuals, but we do need to work towards more systemic solutions. So when you're considering that in this election, make sure you're thinking about what you value as far as preservation of our earth. Also, I just want to say another act that you can do that needs to be done is you can make sure that you're really listening to and uplifting the voices of indigenous people who have lived on this land and preserved this land well for such a long time before we came and humans destroyed it in the past however long. So just think about that. Consider the people who have authority and who really understand these issues. Make sure you're listening to them. Make sure you're doing everything you can to understand, understand their methods and listen to other people to figure out what is the best way to approach this crisis. But yeah, look at another interesting thing that we're going to jump into that some of these do relate to the climate and our planet is propositions. This is another thing you're going to be seeing on your ballot this year. So yeah, Melissa's going to tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Brianna. It's so important to really honor all of the Indigenous people. But yeah, with that in mind, we are going to talk about the California propositions specifically. But click the link in our bio to see the other states' measures. But yeah, so in California, there's currently 12 propositions to be discussed. But first of all, what's a proposition? Well, in my experience, I keep on seeing those ads for Prop 16, and I'm always confused at what they mean, like vote yes, vote no. What does that mean? Well, a proposition means that it's a referendum that could alter the state's constitution. And actually, something cool is that a lot of the measures seen on this year's ballot has been there for a really long time, and they're kind of being like repealed or made different in like some sort of small way. Um, but how exactly do you get a proposition on the ballot? Well, there's two ways. Either the California legislature puts it on the ballot for the public, or there could be a signature campaign, and that could be sent over to the legislature. And if enough signatures are collected, then it could be placed on the ballot. But yeah, during this segment, I'm going to break down what each proposition means and how it's going to affect Californians and taxpayers in general. So let's start with Prop 14. Prop 14 is asking if taxpayers should continue to fund stem cell research. So Prop 14 actually leads back to Prop 71, and Prop 71 was something approved in 2004. And this proposition created the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, and this prop awarded $3 billion in seed money, which means that it was enough money to keep the center going for about 15 or so years, and it was just given to make some cutting edge research. But here's the dilemma. The money is about to run out this year, which means that voters will have to decide on this prop if they should award $5.5 billion to contribute to this research. So a vote for this proposition would really be contributing more towards cutting edge research ranging from Alzheimer's treatments to repairing tooth decay. But if you vote no, this might entirely kill the program, and there will not be a California Institute of Stem Cell Research, and that is kind of alarming, but it's also controversial in a matter of ways. But let's move on to Prop 15. So Prop 15 is it's a proposition to decide whether to raise taxes on commercial and industrial properties in order to generate billions of dollars for school and government services. So this means that building properties, like the tax on that will increase substantially, but this could be a good meaning. It could provide more money to public schools and government sectors, and if a yes vote will create 2 tracks, which means it'll be like a split roll of taxes for commercial and residential buildings, which means that taxes will be different there. But a vote against this proposition would leave the original tax rules the same, which means that taxes won't be increased for these commercial buildings. So now I'm actually going to skip Prop 16 because we're going to discuss it as a group in a later bit, but let's move on to Prop 17. So Prop 17 is talking about restoring voting rights for those on parole. So those who are out of jail and who are on parole, this prop wants to make it legal for those on parole to vote. But it's just to clarify, it's not letting those who are in prison to vote, just the ones who are in parole. So a vote yes would mean that it would make it legal for these people to vote, but a vote no would make it not legal to vote. So it's like a yes or no option. Prop 18 is something really interesting to our generation. It's deciding on primary voting for 17-year-olds. So this proposition would allow 17-year-olds to vote in any primary or special election in California if they turn 18 by the following general election. So that's really interesting because I feel like a lot with our generation, we're so eager to get out and vote. And this proposition, if approved, would make such a substantial change in voter turnout. And I'm really excited about that proposition. Yeah, so Prop 19 is about the senior homeowners proposition. So this proposition would allow senior homeowners, so those who are 55 plus, as well as disabled people, and anyone who lost their property in a natural disaster, such as a fire, to take some property tax and commission when they sell a house and buy a new one. So a vote yes would definitely allow these homeowners to get the commission, but a vote no would not allow them to do anything at all, and they would just not get more commission to rebuild their house after a natural disaster. Now there are a couple of propositions left. So there's Proposition 20, and this proposition would actually amend parts of Proposition 47 and Proposition 57, which were propositions from years back. And this means that it would double the list of crimes that are considered violent, which means that it would make some misdemeanors felonies, but it would also lower the dollar threshold for felony theft. So for example, if something was stolen, such as something worth $900, it would be considered a felony now. But if this proposition would be passed, if someone stole something worth $450, that would be considered a felony. And it would cancel out the dollar threshold of $900. And also something positive is that it would fix flaws in the criminal justice system of California, which has a lot of loopholes. Now, there's Proposition 21, and Proposition 21 would let cities write new rent control laws for old housing, or even expand rent control rules that they already have. And cities could also prevent landlords from raising rents on a unit when tenants move out. And a vote yes would approve this, and a vote no would obviously not approve this. But something important to consider is that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are some tenants that are trying to profit off of this, and they want to raise rent instead of lower it. And this proposition would kind of ban and block that, so everybody could have an equal and equitable access to affordable housing and just housing in general. So now Prop 22 is actually a pretty important proposition because it's very controversial against these big corporations, such as Lyft, DoorDash, Uber Eats. But this would make an employee of gig job companies, such as those, like I just said, DoorDash or Lyft, they would make them an independent contractor, which means that these companies would have to pay for health insurance and even a spot on the stock market if they wanted to. And they would not have to pay standard minimum wage and hour restrictions because they would be working off of their own time. But I think it's really crucial because these companies currently are really kind of bearing or stripping all of these employees of their rights and not even saying that they're employees from Uber or Lyft. They're just saying that they work for the company, but they're not an employee, which is confusing also. But yeah, so let's move on to Prop 23. Prop 23 is also important because this has been on the ballot for various years. So this prop is like some requirements for dialysis clinics, which means that at dialysis clinics, there must be at least one physician on site, and it would require that one physician to get them to report infections, and also if the dialysis clinic is in terrible conditions for any reason, they would get health department's approval to close the clinic. And in addition, this proposition would help prevent discrimination against patients, which is also another effort to make healthcare a little more equitable as well. And then Prop 24 is asking, should California change its data privacy law? And this proposition would create a new state agency or a new kind of advisory board to enforce the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this act was put into place this year, I believe. And this was a law that made all online retailers and companies that would state what data, which types were collected from the visitor, and they had the option to block data cookies. And this prop would also allow the customer to set a limit on how they use data, which is a very big win for privacy rules and laws. And finally, the last prop is Prop 25. Should California end the use of cash bail to determine who gets out of jail before trial? So this means that a yes vote would keep the law SB 10, which is a law that has already been put into place, but it would keep it in place. And that means that it would replace the cash bail with a risk assessment system that would let people to wait for trial at their home instead of at the jail or the detainment center. And that would be based on various factors. And a no vote would not end the use of cash bail. And so now we have Proposition 16, and we're actually going to delve into a discussion. But first, I just want to hear, I've been talking for a while, I just want to hear everyone's thoughts. So go ahead, anyone who wants to speak.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for going into depth with all of those. And younger listeners, even if you're not voting this year, thanks for sticking with us. All of that information is still really relevant to you, even if you can't vote on it this year. It's great that you're staying informed and that you're staying engaged with what's going on, because sooner or later you will be voting. So it's important to start understanding these ideas as they come up.
Yeah, for sure. I think also something important is Prop 16, because it could also affect those who are not even eligible to vote. And Prop 16 wants to reverse what Prop 209 did, which kind of forced the state to use race and gender blind criterion admissions and admissions to like public universities, as well as contracting, public contracting, or in setting aside resources for identity-based groups. And actually an interesting fact that I found is that people from underrepresented groups who applied to UC Berkeley after Prop 209 was instigated were 31% less likely to get accepted, according to a report issued by the UC Office of the President. So I want to hear your thoughts. This is really controversial because I feel like there really needs to be equality and equity for all. So what do y'all think?
Yeah, so this proposition is super important, obviously. I know it's been really controversial because of its relationship to affirmative action and people misunderstanding what that is and what that entails. But Shirley Weber is a government official, and this is how she says it. She's an advocate for the passing of Prop 16. And so what she's doing is she explains that, this is a quote from her, she explains, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, as well as recent tragedies of police violence, is forcing Californians to acknowledge the deep-seated inequality and far-reaching institutional failures that show that your race and gender still matter. So I think there's this assumption, and this came up a lot when affirmative action first began, this assumption that your gender or your race don't, like, almost as if racism and sexism aren't still raging, I guess, and people think it's more of like only in extreme cases. But as Shirley Weber explains, sexism, racism, there's still institutional problems, and even if it's not a super obvious issue, it's definitely something that still happens. So that's why affirmative action is so important. So yeah, I don't know. This means, just so we don't get it confused, this doesn't mean that in the case of, for example, college applications, right? This just means that admissions officers could look at an application and have like the knowledge of somebody's gender or race And they're allowed to use that as a consideration for the application, but only so they can conduct holistic reviews for goals like maybe diversifying the campus or something like that. But it's not using a racial point system where someone gets like a specific amount of points towards being accepted simply because of their race. It's just so we can like kind of make sure that our demographics of a certain university are inclusive, etc. So yeah, it's not saying that people, it's leveling the playing field. It's not putting anybody at an advantage. It's just helping underrepresented people have equal opportunities. So that's kind of how I feel, I guess.
Yeah.
My little interpretation of it.
Yeah, that's a great interpretation. I feel like that really encapsulated like the pros and cons of this. But yeah, Prop 16 is so crucial because it could affect anybody who's applying to college or even people who want to work as independent contractors. And I just feel like it's something that California has to take a stance on, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
An example of how Prop 16 might work in our in just like daily life is that back when California did allow affirmative action, state offices set goals for how many contracts they awarded to women-owned and minority-owned businesses, and it's important because minority-owned businesses are often neglected, and it's they're the same as anyone else, so we should be uplifting their businesses as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just right like college applications, but it's in who we're hiring or who we're supporting as business owners, and how we're spending our funds and whatever. So yeah, that's I think is a really important proposition. And if you're still a little bit confused about what it means in its relation to Prop 209, definitely look into it and make sure, I guess as a final thought about all of these propositions, really make sure that you research these if you don't already understand them. But yeah, if you're voting this year, really make sure that you know what you're voting for and why. But thank you, Melissa. In addition to the propositions, we have actual people on our ballots, right? So obviously we have the president, but we also need to think about our state and local elections. And I know it can be intimidating because there are so many different people and you feel like your vote really matters. So you should be informed about who you're voting for, but you still have a little less than 2 weeks. So you can do this and you can use our voter guides, etc. But so local elections and state elections are just as important as the presidential election. We have US representatives that we elect, US senators. We have a state governor, we have state executives, state legislators, state judges. So all of these different positions, and they have a lot of power in the decisions that are made for your state. And so make sure you look at the candidates and know who you want to vote for. Not all of these positions change every year. So for example, in California, we're not electing a new governor this year, but that will come in future elections. So if you want to check out the website, Ballotpedia, we'll put the link in our Instagram bio and in this video description as well. But that is a super great resource for checking out what different positions are, who the candidates are this year, and whether or not they will be on your ballot depending on what state you're in. So those are some of the state positions. But then we're also going to look at local positions. You have local judges, you have school boards, and then you have I don't know how to say that, municipal government. So like people like the mayor. So we have power to elect all of these, like to choose who we want to put in these positions. And the local governments are really important because they are responsible for a bunch of things that impact us personally. Young people and everybody else in the community. Things like local school quality, policing, public safety, holding police accountable. I think that's a really important conversation to be having right now and looking at who we want to put in those positions of power. Looking at rent costs and affordable housing. I know that's an issue in a lot of our communities, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. They also control city colleges, public transit, they address houselessness. So all of those things are very important. So a few reasons, if you don't already care, I want you to care. So local issues really matter. Local authorities are responsible for a variety of public services, stuff with employment, housing, etc. Another interesting thing that was brought up to me by my mentor, and she said I should definitely address this, is it's much easier to hold our local officials accountable than it is to hold the president accountable. You know, we have what power we do have to control what the president does, but it's really not that much power. Whereas with our local officials, we can gather and we can organize and we can change and we can let them know how we feel a lot more easily. So your local officials, you have the power to elect them, but you also have the power to make them hear your voice. Local officials control funding. Many landmark federal policies have started at a local level. This is just interesting to me, but a little fun fact. Things like women's suffrage, environmental protection, marriage equality, and minimum wage, all of those landmark cases, landmark Supreme Court cases, started as local cases in local courts. So you may think that you don't have the power to create change, but these local people, as I keep saying, do. Your vote counts. Not as many people vote in local elections, so this means your vote matters more. Currently, in our current political climate, there are threats on women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, immigration reform, etc. These are all issues that are addressed at a national level, but can also be addressed at a local level. Criminal justice reform is local. And then my last thing, if you're not convinced that local elections are important, vote because you can. A lot of people don't have the privilege of being able to vote, and if you do, you should use that privilege. Make your voice heard and use it to fight for the people who don't have this privilege, like incarcerated people or even young people who don't have the power yet to vote, but these decisions are definitely affecting us. So yeah, be conscious of that. And now we're going to dive into some of the issues in each of our communities. All four of us, in case you don't know, we're scattered around the Bay Area, so we're just going to each address a little piece.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Brianna. Voting is such a powerful tool that a lot of us can hold, but not everybody has. And I think that it's up to us and it's our duty to go vote. But in my hometown, Redwood City, I'd actually like to discuss the ongoing housing crisis. So this has been happening for quite a long time. I think ever since I was a little kid. But now the median home price is $1.5 million. And that is actually almost the 5 times the price of an average house in the United States, which is around $230,000. But even worse, the federal government considers a family of four making $129,000 in this area to be low income. And I think to myself, that's preposterous. How is that low income? So Diana Reddy is the current mayor of Redwood City, and I feel like she has to be held accountable for this. Last year, I actually met with her as part of the Redwood City Youth Advisory Board, and honestly, the answer that she gave me was not convincing at all. They all told me, all the city council members just told me the same answer that, oh, we're building this like low-income apartments or whatever, or we're encouraging having accessory dwelling, or it's called ADUs, but it's basically like a detachment from an actual house. But that answer didn't convince me enough. And growing up, and even now, I've seen what used to be a small town, Redwood City, explode into a bustling Silicon Valley metropolitan area. And also something to consider is that these new luxury apartments that are being built around my house, they're being built in the heart of the city for almost more than $2,000 for a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. And I feel like this is just another factor of why elections are so important, because we need new, like fresh, creative minds to come up with the right and appropriate solutions. And also, there should be some sort of partnership with other cities in the Bay Area or in the region even to solve this crisis, because this isn't just happening in my city. I've seen it everywhere, and I feel like the right people have to be held accountable for all of this.
Yeah, totally. I completely relate with that's funny that you picked that topic to talk about, because I was also looking at the housing crisis and the affordable housing options in my city. I live in Watsonville. which is a relatively small town right near Santa Cruz, which is also a bustling tourist location. But yeah, so the average rent price in Watsonville has actually gone up 300, like the average rent price is at $1,677 right now, and that's about $300 more than it was just 3 years ago. So that's a pretty substantial change. And another thing that's interesting regarding my particular city, but I think it happens in a lot of other places, the average median home price in Santa Cruz, which is a much more, like a little bit larger and much more popular area, is the average house price in Santa Cruz is $915,500, and the average cost in Watsonville is only 500 only. I say only, but it's still a lot of money, $587,400. So what's happening is there are a lot of people living in Santa Cruz who are paying all this money for their house, and they kind of want to downgrade to something cheaper, so they're coming into Watsonville. And then there are these, I don't know, it's just a difficult problem because we have this huge demand for more housing and more affordable housing, but there are not enough affordable housing options to meet this demand, and prices keep going up because there's such a high demand and not enough options, I guess. So yeah, it's definitely a problem, I think, in places all around the country.
In my in the area I've lived in, homelessness is a huge problem, and San Francisco has and continues to have a huge problem with homelessness. So I've lived in San Francisco most of my life, and I've seen the homeless population grow so much, and it's um, it's starting to become a little bit dangerous, and also it's very saddening to see how many people don't have a home. So many homeless people that are in the marina, especially, or in a lot of restaurants. They're getting food from restaurants, which is amazing, but they're also getting money from people. And while it's amazing to want to support the homeless, they are using the money that they're being given for drugs instead of in helping them move to a better way of living. So to take on some different approaches. And one of these approaches is we can cut some of our military spending, and we can solve the homeless problem in the entire country by just cutting a sliver of the military spending. And as a community, we need to provide programs, education, housing, and assistance and medical care for the homeless, because homeless deserve a second chance, and we should create the possibility to give them their second chance.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really important to, you know, as a society and as leaders, we need to stop the villainization of the houseless population, and rather than, criticizing them for their condition, we need to help them, give them the resources and the funding and whatever, use our funding to support them in the ways that they need to be supported, and that can help them create a better life for themselves. And so when you're talking about funding and policy and stuff like that, and even reaching like a population with a message, like, how I said, we need to stop villainizing the houseless population, that's all stuff that can happen by electing people in your local governments. So, because remember, they control the funding and they control the policies. And so really, really, really be thinking about all these issues. And when you're researching candidates, I don't know if you want to jump into this right now, Naya, but when you're researching a candidate, look into all of the issues and use a voter guide. And like Naya was saying, she's going to describe a little bit about that, but what a voter guide is and how you can use one. And we'll have some resources on our Instagram.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brianna. So a voter guide is similar to, well, it's what I talked about earlier. So the different issues that we're facing as a country, and what the different and where the different presidential candidates stand. So immigration, gun violence, all of that falls under a voter guide. And we'll have a link, a voter guide, in the description box and on our Instagram bio, so in our website. So it's really important to take a look at that because whichever president you want to vote for, you need to understand how to support or where they stand on these issues. And a voter guide is exactly where you can understand these perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Naya. I feel like to tie in with our call to action, and also the pressing issues in our community, it is important to reach out, maybe email, write a letter, call on the phone. All of our municipal and state and even governmental from the government, all of our representatives and senators also, and just tell them about the issues that are really going on in the streets in the cities. And I think that is also a big factor to consider when kind of deciding who to vote for, because it depends on how they're going to answer. And I feel like something that we really have to consider is all of this. But yeah, there
Yeah.
are so many. I'm sorry.
No, you're all good. Keep going.
um, I feel like all of the things that we've really talked about in this episode is just so important to consider, because if we don't look at one issue, if we just look at one issue when we're deciding on like who to vote for, then that is definitely a red flag. We want to look at all of the pressing issues this candidate from whatever sector, whatever um, race, like for your city or for your country. We have to kind of consider everything. But yeah, anyways, what's everyone else's thoughts?
No, yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. And that's a great call to action, calling your representatives and your senators, that's great. But there are a bunch of other things we can do that we're going to give you resources for as well.
Yeah, so there are, so even like we mentioned, if you're not old enough to vote, here are some calls to actions and things that you can do to help. So if you're old enough, go for it, vote. If you're not old enough, you can tell your friends and families to vote, and you can help them understand voter guides if they need. So this is time to talk about local state candidates. So remember to reach out to your community whichever way you can. And you can do this to inform your community, and it'll help tremendously because every vote counts, every voice counts. So another thing is the debates are recorded, and if you listen to those, help you in your understanding on the different candidates. So helpful to go and back and listen to those. And there are lots of websites that show what you can do to help reduce climate change. We'll have some of those websites in our bio. And Melissa or Brianna, do you guys want to jump in to just say the rest?
Yeah, so another thing is younger kids. I know that we're not all able to vote yet, but it's important that we are being informed about what's going on and about the issues, even if we don't have the power yet to vote, because one day we will. So if you're listening right now, if you've stuck through all this way, even if you're not old enough, thank you. It's really important that you understand these issues. And then if you get a chance, share this podcast or share the resources that we're giving you to your friends, to your family, to all the young people you know, because all of this is important to know. And I feel like we keep saying that, but it's so, so, so important. But yeah, we're going to have a list of all of these resources on our social media. So specifically our Instagram. If you don't follow us already, our Instagram is girlsinaction.sf. So go give us a follow. We're going to be posting some Instagram infographic kind of style things where we kind of sum up what we said in this podcast episode. We're going to be talking about the election information, ways you can get involved even if you're under 18. And then we have a link tree in our bio that will have all of the resources we've mentioned. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And yeah.
Thank you so much for listening and tuning in and staying with us throughout this entire conversation. We hope you all have a great day and hopefully see you soon for our next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Bye.